We're going to move into the Big Ten. So first out of these, I know you really like two of these, so I'm going to let you take your pick of those. I'm going to go to Sidney Brown first. Probably the less interesting. I'll let you guys decide that. I actually like Sidney Brown, although I don't know that he's going to have the highest draft capital here of even the Big Ten guys we're talking about. He was a 3-star high school recruit. He just turned 23. Interestingly enough, he played college with his identical twin brother, Chase Brown, running back. So that they got to play both on the same college team there. First team All Big Ten in 2022. Again, he had 5 years at Illinois. He's 5'10". He's a guy when they can play up close to the line. I'm going to split my paper around here because it still takes some of my notes by hand. So he was the number one college cover, which is really nice to see. He had 6 interceptions last year. Smart. I thought he had good instincts. He's strong. Missed more tackles than I'd probably like to see. And, moving in and out of cuts and turns, his flexibility and fluidity isn't necessarily what you'd like to see out of a free safety type. So it'll be interesting to see where he's pegged in the NFL. He'd probably start more as a special teamer or backup safety for his career. But I like what he brings to the table, and I think he could have a future if he continues to grow, just because of how well he did in coverage and with the way the NFL is moving towards that. Fantasy-wise, remains to be seen, even if he gets on the field, if he's really good in coverage and not as adept at tackling. That's going to hurt us for our purposes, but I think he'll be around in the NFL for a while. He's probably day 3 pick if I had to peg him right now. Nothing wrong with that. We see guys every year, 4th, 5th round, get shots, and even later than that sometimes. But how do you kind of feel about him? Because I know he's not one of the bigger names on our list here.
He's not one of the bigger names, and he's probably going to be one of those guys that honestly it's going to fly right under the radar. And you look at the 40-yard dash and the athletic score that he had. I mean, he's tested extremely, extremely well. 4.47 40-yard dash. His 10-yard split, 20-yard split looked really good. He put up 23 on bench press. This isn't just a guy who runs around and is speedy. I mean, this is a guy who's working hard, right, in the weight room. He's strong. He's physical. I thought he did a lot of things actually pretty well. You look at the 6 interceptions. That's impressive. But also the thing is that he's showing that 60 tackles in 2022, 81 in 2021. 88 in 2019. So even early on in his career, 55 in 2018. I mean, this guy as a sophomore and a freshman was generating meaningful production for his team. And not only that, 2 tackles for loss as a freshman, 2.5 as a sophomore, 3.5 his last season at Illinois. I mean, he was a guy who in various ways was productive and effective. He is versatile. And again, the speed, physicality, he does do a lot of things well. Now, the competition, I don't know. That's the question mark, right? For me, that's the one thing I worry about. They do have him listed as a strong safety. I see him more as a guy who could be used as a nickel, just because of his ability to cover is a little bit elevated, but still able to be a good tackler, which I think is something that you need at the nickel position, and a willing tackler. So I am going to watch where he lands. I think that's really important. He could be one of those guys who sneaks up on us and all of a sudden he's in a good position and we're talking about him. But I don't think that he's a guy who will be drafted highly in fantasy drafts. I think he's going to be a guy that's going to be a little bit lower down the list, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, that mental filing cabinet you talk about, I got a feeling Sidney Brown is going to be one of those guys you're going to want to have in that cabinet somewhere, and tracking where he goes, and seeing if there's an opportunity or a window for him to get a shot.
Yeah, he's one of the guys that if you're talking about late draft pick that I can stash somewhere, he's probably right near the top of defensive backs anyway for guys that are going to go later, but I still have interest in rostering, so I agree with that. Which one do you want to talk about here next?
Oh, man.
I know you like them both.
My favorite out of the two. Man, their games are so different. But I'll tell you what, I like a physical football player. I like a guy who's going to come up and smack someone in the mouth, and that's Devin Matthews. They call him Monster. That's his nickname. He's 6'2", 205, prototypical size. You look at the way he tested. He actually tested pretty well, 4.55 40. They got him listed at free safety, but he's the kind of player that I think could actually be either or. He could be a free safety or a strong safety because of that physicality. Again, the size, all of that stuff looks really good. Even his vertical, his broad jump. I mean, by all measures, he didn't test the greatest, but he tested very respectively in almost every category, which you love to see. You look at the tackles. I mean, he had 65 tackles in 2022, only 48 the year before that, but he had 3 tackles for loss in each of the last 2 seasons as well. So again, a guy who I think is a willing tackler. He was able to generate some turnovers, 1 interception in each of his last 3 seasons. He was a returning senior, so the age is going to be a factor here. It could hurt him just a little bit, I suppose, but ultimately at the end of the day, I mean, these guys are going to have a lot of football to play when they get to the NFL. You're going to get to squeeze a lot out of them. And especially for a player like this, who I think will find his place on a team, will get a shot. Obviously, the better the situation, the more his stock value goes up. But I think if he lands in a favorable situation for sure, probably going to be pretty happy with that. So he's a player I am really keeping a close eye on. I don't know. I think he's probably near the bottom of my top 5, but definitely a player that I'm very, very high on and am curious to see what he does.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what the NFL thinks about him, quite honest, because there isn't a lot of buzz about him at all anywhere. And we see every year that doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, the Patriots are usually the laughing stock of that joke when they take Cole Strange in the first round and people have him in the 5th round, or, Logan Mankins historically, if you go back to Mel Kiper saying who when he got drafted, So not everyone in the media having someone on the radar doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to be drafted high. Doesn't mean they're not going to be fantasy productive. And if you look at, just the physical makeup, which is a big part of what the NFL is looking for, because these are the top of the top when you look at athletes, Devin Matthews has that. And he does stuff well with it. I think he's a good tackler. So size against the run defense, he certainly could be one of those hammers. And I agree. I think he probably does fit better in the NFL at a strong safety. If he gets drafted and put somewhere where his skill set doesn't align with what they want him to do, which unfortunately does happen for players every year. People get put in positions that aren't the best for their skill set. It's something you're going to have to take into account when drafting them, because that can change. New coach comes in and tries something different. A lot of different things can happen, but it feels like he's probably a day 3 pick right now just because he's not being talked about.
Yeah.
And is he going to get that draft capital, and is he going to get a chance? Because I agree, there's a lot of interesting stuff about him. But again, talking about the team he's on, Indiana isn't a powerhouse for football either. And, how much of that is going to matter with where he goes.
Every year you have these players, at least I do, where you plant your flag on them. Devin Matthews is kind of my plant my flag guy at safety. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, someone bookmark that and tag us on Twitter or come back after our show.
And someone will. Someone's going to take us up on that. They've already done that. They've clipped it, they've bookmarked it, and they're ready.
Looking, it looks like it's, I can't even tell that. I think it is Monday, May 1st is going to be our show after the draft. So come back to that. The whole draft will be done at that point. You can come back and hear our takes, and we'll see where some of these guys that, we have interest in now actually end up going. Yeah. And speaking of you having interest in, I know you like this guy a lot too. Jair Brown, 3-star high school recruit, 23 years old, 3 years at Penn State, 3rd team All Big Ten, 21 and 22. Definitely a little bit smaller than Monster Matthews. Brown is 5'11", about 205. He's versatile, cornerback and safety play, but he's physical. He's a plus in run support, even at that size, which I like to see. He's got a lot of energy. He's got 10 interceptions in 2 starting seasons, which is fantastic. You love to see that out of guys. He had a fine, relative athletic score. There was nothing to write home about. It was 5.77, I think. His 40-yard dash wasn't fantastic, but it wasn't the worst we've seen on here either, like a 4.65. Bench press he did already at 18 reps. He's a little bit shorter, again, than you'd like to see, so he doesn't have that prototypical size. But overall, I did like him a lot. I know another guy that you were talking about early on in our chats over at Discord. So where do you have him sort of in your rookie safety rankings at the moment?
Again, he could fall somewhere in the bottom, probably of the top 5, maybe 4 or 5. There are a few guys I have picked out here that I'm like you, and he's one of those guys that when I'm go through and I pick guys out that I like, when I put on the tape, I really do like what he does. 70, he's very consistent in the tackle department. 74 last year, 73 in 2021. So he's consistently getting tackles. He did have 4.5 sacks this season, which I thought was really impressive, was to go along with 7 tackles for loss. So that just shows you how effective he can be in the backfield and disruptive. He can be, able to utilize, not only his, strength to close in and make the tackles and wrap up, but also that explosiveness. He did have a good 10-yard split, 20-yard split. You would like to have seen him run a little bit faster 40, but again, these measurables, they're not the end all be all. Sometimes you got to just suit it up and go out there and see what somebody puts on tape. And this is one of those guys who, I can discount some of the athletic score when I see what he's able to do on tape. He is a pretty good coverage guy. I mean, 3 passes defended in 22 with 5 in 2021. So he was consistently put into coverage and they trusted him to do what he needed to do. And he did that. So I don't know. At 5'11", that's probably the only thing that I will say, the measurable that does concern me. Is it a deal breaker? No, it's certainly not, because he's bringing 205, 210 pounds to the table. So, he can deliver pretty heavy hit, at times. So, but I don't think that's necessarily his game. I think he is more versatile than that. When you watch him play, he's not all about hard hitting. He's not all about tackling, even though he's consistently done it. He's quick. He moves around the field. He makes plays a lot of different ways. So he's a guy that I have my eye on for sure. I want to see where he gets drafted again. And then that'll kind of depend on where he lands on my draft board. If he moves up or moves down, we'll see how it shakes out. But I like him.
Yeah, and he feels like one of those guys that's probably going to end up in that day 2 grouping of players here. And I think after the pro day, his relative athletic score did jump up. It looks like it jumped up like a 7.9, which is a good bit better, which matches more kind of what you're talking about being on screen. And I will say there is something, and I can't really just quantify it, but there is something for some of these players being better on the field play than they do testing. And whether it's just the conditions, adrenaline affecting you positively or negatively on one or the other, competitors, in the heat of battle, I think there is something to that for some players. Not everyone, and again, it's not something that you can just mark down that someone had in their DNA or something like that, but I do think that kind of fits with Brown, at least for how his initial testing went. He didn't feel like he was sort of in that lower half, or whatever you want to call it, of safety play from what we've seen for these guys. So again, I do think the size, his height certainly comparatively isn't good, but the rest of it across the board really is. And probably, day 2 is my best guess. And again, I think there's going to be a lot of them, but another guy that I like too.